My name is Dolores Caffey Fleming, and I am a past national president of the Auxiliary to the National Medical Association. I am also a member of the faculty and a principal investigator on some grants at Charles Drew University of Medicine and Science. It is my distinct pleasure this afternoon to introduce you to someone who is very, very important in the world of health and what really matters in health these days. We all know about the pandemic that we've been through. You, as students, you know that this has been a difficult time, but I am so honored to bring to you our next guest, who is Dr. Ramona Burris, who is she's a doctor of pharmacy. She is Associate Director of the Diversity and Inclusion in Clinical Trials at the Janssen Pharmaceutical Company. In this role, she is committed to leading activities necessary to increase the participation of underrepresented persons, which is so important for us, and underserved populations in clinical research projects through partnership with community organizations. Ramona joined the Janssen in 2019 as an infectious disease senior medical science liaison. She established relationships with key opinion leaders and engaged in scientific exchanges while supporting company-sponsored trials and responding to unsolicited medical information requests. Ramona is her decade-long career of healthcare leadership has been dedicated to providing health equity, which is one of the key things that is necessary today. Her prior role as a healthcare specialty supervisor with Walgreens required extensive medical and business knowledge to manage 13 specialized locations serving patients with HIV, hepatitis, chronic inflammatory disease, cancer, and other complicated health conditions. Ramona has earned multiple degrees, including the Doctor of Pharmacy from the University of Chicago at Illinois. The University of Illinois at Chicago. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Ramona Burris, who will be speaking to you in the introduction to clinical trials.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm super excited to speak to everyone here that's part of the call. As students who are embarking on their professional careers as clinicians, let me just start by saying that we need you. Our communities need you. It has been definitely researched and validated that patients have better outcomes when they have clinicians that they can identify with. And there are multiple identities that we all have, but we know that having a pool of providers who are racially and ethnically diverse is important. Having representation of women, including transgendered women and transgendered men, all that is important because it's really the key driver for the health equity conversation that Dolores mentioned. It's key. We need more folks as clinicians. That means more folks as physicians, nurses, pharmacists like myself. As Dolores was going over my career, I was thinking back I don't think when I was in pharmacy school that I thought that I would ever be part of research and development, that I would ever be employed by a pharmaceutical company. But I just want everyone here in the audience to kind of just walk away with, if you continue to move forward in your purpose and in your passion, the world is your oyster, as the saying goes. So thank you for just letting me start the conversation there. But I do want to talk about clinical trials. We've heard so much recently around clinical trials, specifically to the pandemic that we're currently in, and a lot of the research that went on to identify vaccines and treatments for the novel COVID-19 virus. So as we think about, again, the larger health equity conversation, I want to kind of just have a grounding discussion around research and trials and why it's important, and why, to me, I feel it's the first critical step for us to really get our hands around health equity. Clinical research is definitely important for us to not only learn about, how do we make medications to treat, to cure, to prevent disease, but it's also an opportunity for us to learn about the diseases themselves. And it's important for us to have representation in that space, because if we don't have the patients who are disproportionately impacted by disease or what have you, then we don't have a fuller knowledge when it comes to those of us who are clinicians. It's research that helps us to understand, again, not only how do we design medications, but how we set up guidelines when it comes to diagnosing patients with things as simple as hypertension, but also for comorbidities and conditions that are complicated, such as breast cancer or prostate cancer. So I'm going to start with a little bit of overview. And please, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. But I want to start off with, what is a clinical trial? And before I even jump into a trial, let's just talk about clinical research in general. There are so many ways that we engage in research. If you can think back to your elementary school days when you were taking biology and some of those science courses where we were doing experiments, essentially research is experiments. But research is controlled in such a way that we make sure that we protect the rights of patients and participants in that space, and that we really set guidelines so that the conclusions that we draw from these experiments, from these research, opportunities, from trials, is such that it's validated, that it's, sound, it's statistically sound. We can make assumptions. And so that's why you'll hear the formalized terms of clinical research and clinical trials separated from experiment, because yes, there are controls and measures in place to protect the patients, protect the participants, but also make sure that the outcomes and what that research and experiments tell us is actually validated and sound for us to make decisions clinically. So you can see research where you may be offered to fill out a form, where maybe potentially a researcher wants to learn more about maybe your socioeconomic status. Have you completed high school? Do you have any college credentials? How much money do you make? There are so many ways that informs that research comes in. I also think about some of the genetic research that's going on now, where you may be asked to supply blood sample so that researchers can learn more about your genetic makeup and kind of help form decisions on what type of labs we put in place to diagnose patients with health conditions and different ailments. But then two, there's another piece where we look at medications. And that's really when you start to hear clinical trial. It's more formalized around medications or even med devices that are used to treat conditions. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, clinical trials, is because my role is to make sure that the compounds that we develop from a pharma perspective go through a rigorous clinical trial process to make sure that if they do get approved and come on market as an approved medication, they are going to be beneficial to the patients who are going to be the end user. So clinical trials and research is just an experiment, but again, designed in such a way that it helps investigators and scientists learn more about diseases and medicines and treatments. You'll see here in the third bullet that it's conducted by doctors, but also other healthcare providers. So we're looking at nurses, we're looking at advanced practice providers, so physician assistants, we're looking at nurse practitioners. We're even thinking about PhDs. You can see a lot of those different roles be investigators in research. And what it means to be an investigator in research is that you're responsible for the research that's being conducted at your site. Now, you may be part of research where there are potentially 100 of sites across the globe, and you're one site. But as an investigator, you are in charge of making sure that everything that happens in that research setting is ethical, that there is no harm done to patient, and that, again, the conclusions and information that's pulled from that research is one that's scientifically sound and statistically significant. So it's a huge responsibility because it means a lot of protocol management, making sure your staff is trained, but again, making sure that we're having authentic touch points with patients so that we can learn more about them and make sure they're the right fit for the research that we're conducting. What kind of questions can clinical trials answer? So if I'm looking at it from a medication standpoint, it's going to tell me, is the medication safe? Does it work for the health condition that we're creating it for? How is it metabolized? And when we see metabolized, I know that sounds like a crazy big word, but think about the different ways that our body processes things. I can have a drug that's metabolized by the liver, and then I can have one that's metabolized elsewhere in the body. Or if I look at how is it eliminated, I need to know what type of pressure is it putting on the kidneys? Because maybe if I'm standing up this trial, I want someone who has healthy kidneys, and maybe I'm looking at creatinine clearance cutoff as part of my, protocol and design of the study. So all that's important, and all that is kind of what we learn in this research setting. And then two, if I'm standing up a drug, let's say hypothetically for cholesterol, and I already know that there are other medications on the market that doctors are prescribing, that clinicians are prescribing to their patients to treat cholesterol, I want to think about, okay, well, where does my potential medication fit in this role of therapy? Am I saying that, my medication may be better than what's on market? Or am I thinking, hey, it may be for someone who has maybe a familial connection to, cholesterol, a genetic component of cholesterol? So these are all questions that we're seeking to answer as we set up different clinical trials specific to medications. There's a question here from Pamela that Black people are hesitant to participate in clinical trials. What can be done to change this? Thank you, Pamela. It starts with having conversations like this, right? Where we really get to the root of what does research mean? We know that in our communities, our Black and Brown communities, research and healthcare itself has a complicated history, right? We know about Tuskegee. We know about Puerto Rican birth control pill trials where there were harm and grievances done to people within our community. But what I'm happy to say is that there are, again, those measures in place from a safety perspective that we make sure we protect the rights of patients and participants in studies where we didn't have that before. You have people like me who are members of the community that sit in these R&D spaces where decisions are made, so we can too circumvent and say, hey, no, let's make sure we do our due diligence as a sponsor of research so that we don't have any harm done to patients. So yeah, there's been a shift from, again, what we know to have occurred in the past, because, and it really wasn't that long ago, if we're really going to be honest about it, there have been some, within our lifetime, some failures in research. But again, holistically, we're doing better. There are more checks and balances. We definitely have to report to an IRB, a review board who looks at our procedures for studies. So there's more formal processes in place to, really protect the rights of patients at the end of the day. That's what it is. And so the more that we can talk about that to the community, whether it's Black folks, whether it's, Latinx, Hispanic community, whether it's, whomever, that gets the conversation started, and then we get to build the trust. But we really have to just answer questions that community members have. There's also a question here about teens participating in clinical trials. So if you're underage, you would definitely have to get the consent of a parent to be a part of clinical trials. But for anyone who, is interested in being part of research, the first step is to start with your doctor to see if that's even a viable option. I'm going to go through at some point the stages of research, because not all clinical research is meant to be an option of last resort. So often I think there's a misunderstanding that, hey, I'm dying of this disease and there's no medication to treat it, so all I have is clinical trials. In some spaces that may be true, but in many spaces, when I look at the drugs that are being developed by scientists and by companies such as mine, I see that it's very much so preventative medicine, precision medicine, where we're going after certain biomarkers and certain genetic factors, and we're, coming up with therapies that are curative and preventative. So it's kind of shifted, how clinical trials are and why it's important for us to be in these spaces. Because again, if I think about something like hypertension, where we know disproportionately Black and Brown communities and patients have a higher likelihood of being diagnosed with hypertension or high blood pressure, and we have worse outcomes. I want to make sure if I'm making a drug for that particular condition, that I have enough patients who will be the end user of that product when it gets to market, right? We have to make sure that our research population matches the patient population that's impacted by that particular condition or disease. Let's see. Sorry for the sirens in the background. So as I mentioned before, there are many checks and balances in research, and we'll see that that's evident when we look at different phases of research. So phase one, that's typically where I say, hey, I have this compound that I developed in the lab on a Petri dish. I think it may be good for high blood pressure. How can I check and see and make sure that this is really something that's good, that's going to work? So I'm going to set up a phase one trial. So I'm going to find healthy volunteers, right? I'm going to find people who are not diagnosed with high blood pressure, but folks who are willing to be participants in research, again, who are healthy, no obvious health conditions or comorbidities, typically younger. So I'm going to say, hey, would you sign up to be part of this trial just so I can see how this medicine works? Because I have this nice compound. I know it works for hypertension, but I'm kind of not sure if I need it to be a 10 milligram or a 25 milligram. So healthy volunteers, come be a part of this study so I can see the nuances of how this drug is eliminated from the body if it made you break out in a rash. But again, even in this phase 1 point, I know that having folks be part of this research, I'm not going to give them something where their arm falls off, but I want to understand again the specifics and the nuances about dosing and side effects. But again, in that healthy volunteer. Phase 2, I get my results from phase 1. I'm like, okay, this is great. Didn't have any issues. My healthy volunteers didn't complain of headache or any bad side effects. So I get approval to move into phase 2. And really, as we go through these phases, there is a governing body, the Food and Drug Administration, who looks at the results of each of the phases, and they allow the drug companies and researchers to be able to move between the phases. So if they take my phase 1 data, they say, okay, it looks good, no harm done. Let's go to phase 2, where we're actually looking for patients to be part of the study who do have high blood pressure. So in this phase, I may have a couple of different arms. And what I mean by arms is different treatments. So often folks say, I don't want to be part of research because I don't want a placebo. I don't want a sugar pill. You really don't see placebos and sugar pills anymore. So if I'm doing a study for high blood pressure, I'm going to say, okay, what is that popular drug that's already out there to treat high blood pressure? How can I compare my new drug to that? But again, I'm still trying to maybe decide if I want that 10 milligram or 25 milligram. So I may have 3 arms. One where I have a group of patients who are taking the drug that's already approved, and then 2 different ones where I'm saying, hey, this group, I want you to take 10 milligrams, this group, 25 milligrams. And what's important about this too is that in many spaces, the participants and the doses they take and the medications they take is blinded because we don't want bias. We don't want the patients to be taking a new drug and say, hey, I'm having all these horrible side effects. I don't want the doctor to know that, hey, this patient is taking so and so and so and so, because we don't want that bias to influence what their patients are reporting and what we're seeing from an outcomes perspective. If I'm looking at, what is that blood pressure reading? So a lot of this is going on behind the scenes too. But again, safety is definitely priority, but we're blinding it to make sure that there's no biases and we see the real scientific proof of how this drug is working. Phase 3, more people added on. So phase 2 may have been a group of 100 people divided into 3 groups. Phase 3, I may have about 25,000 or 10,000. Again, just to make sure that I'm got the right dose, that we understand really how this drug is processed through the body, make sure we understand side effects, and is it really better than the drug that's already out there treating? So that's what phase 3 is. And these phases, they take a couple of years to actually go through. Phase 1, probably 2 years, same for phase 2. Phase 3, sometimes those trials can last 3 to 4 years. So again, it's really like recruiting the right patients and having them take the medications long enough so that we can draw proper conclusions and be able to submit a final application to the Food and Drug Administration to see if the drug can get on market. There's a question from an attendee: what is the best source to find out which trials are available? Again, I say start with your doctor, but there is a website called clinicaltrials.gov that lists every drug trial that's out there, no matter whether it's from a pharma company like mine or some other researcher, but it has the list of everything that's out there in terms of research. But again, start with your doctor to see, what is the best opportunity for you, or even for a loved one as well too. And then there's another question: should I talk to my doctor before doing a clinical trial? Definitely. And that's why I remember when I said we need you students to be out here as clinicians. That's why it's important. We need our patients and our community and our loved ones to have great relationships with their providers, whether they're physicians, whether they're nurse practitioners, to have a great relationship. I tell folks you should date to make sure you find the right doctor, right? Just like you swipe on Tinder and all these other dating platforms. If you find that you have a primary care person or physician who's not meeting your needs, keep looking until you find that perfect match. But again, we know based on data and asking our patients that they really want providers who look like them. So again, I implore you to continue your path. Hopefully it is down the path of becoming a clinician. But again, we need representation for our patients and for our larger communities to have success. But going back to answer the question, start with your doctor. Uh, let's see. There's a question. How do we encourage older Americans to participate to help genetic and generational family health knowledge? Again, each one teach one, right? I think they taught us that on Sesame Street when we watched it as a kid. But the more that we have these platforms, I'm so excited that Black Health Matters is doing this. Not only is there that larger community facing discussion, but to have a discussion here with students who are pursuing careers in this space, we have to be the voice of reason for a lot of our loved ones and our extended families. So when you are in these situations and you're learning about new things, share that information. Because what I think is most detrimental to our communities is that there's so much misinformation. We have to make sure that what's out there has been validated, and not just because somebody saw it on Facebook, but that it's coming out of the mouths of someone like Dolores, who we know is a credentialed researcher, or there's something that's been published to say, yes, this is validated scientific evidence and knowledge. But there's so much misinformation, and there are so many people, the pundits, who are talking about random things as if they're experts, and they're not. So if you learn something, if there's something that piques your interest, dig into it, become that expert, but continue to be the voice of sharing that information with your loved ones, if you're a clinician, with your patients, because we can't continue to keep knowledge centralized. We have to make sure we share it. And really, with sharing information, with educating, we're also empowering patients, our community, our family members to make better health decisions in the long run, whether that decision is for clinical trials or whether it's just to go see their doctor and not miss that appointment, or whether it's to check their blood pressure at home like their doctor told them, or whether it's to take their medication every day because their doctor or you told them why this medication is important. So all those are critical, again, as we look at the larger health equity conversation, but why our voices need to be heard and especially represented from a clinician standpoint. Let's see. There's another question about what type of roles exist in clinical research and what's required. So you can really have a high school education and still be part of research. Again, there are many roles. You can be that primary investigator who, again, is typically a credential. So either an MD, a DO, an advanced degree in nursing, or a PhD, but they're the ones who's responsible for the overall activity of research at their particular site. But guess what? When it comes to having conversations with patients, you may have a nurse coordinator who's helping to drive that dialogue and say, hey, Ms. Jones, I see that your blood pressure has been really high and we've got you on 5 medications. There's this new research, this new trial that's going on where maybe we can see if we can eliminate some of your medications and put you on that to see if you respond properly to it. Those are important roles that are often forgotten about in the research space, is that having an honest dialogue with the patients to say, hey, this may be an opportunity. Because again, if I look at it just selfishly from a research perspective, we think that it's an option of last resort. But no, there are so many new emerging precision medicines, curative medicines out there that we really just need to make sure that we're in these spaces to be able to take advantage of them, but also for researchers to learn more about how these meds are going to work on us when they eventually get to market, if they get to market. And then 2, again, like I said earlier, it's also an opportunity for us to learn about how disease is manifested differently. If I think about high blood pressure, why is it that we have such high rates of uncontrolled high blood pressure in communities of color? Do we really know? But again, research kind of answers those questions in addition to some others. So you can be a research coordinator, you could be a site manager where you're making sure all the paperwork is fine and that you have your patients signing off on informed consent to give their approval to be part of research. There are so many different roles outside of just the investigator and outside of just the clinician piece. And then if you think about my part of the business, I work in industry where we're helping to stand up these trials. So we need everybody's expertise internally to let us know, hey, are we picking the right sites and right hospitals to engage and to partner with us in research? Or, are we writing our protocol in our trial design properly? Are we making sure that, some of the pieces of literature that we have are translated into languages where we know that patients are gonna, not be English speakers, right? It's small things like that, but those are key critical components to research. I did want to get back to the slides. If we think about phase 4, people are like, well, what is a phase 4 trial? After a company has completed phase 3, they typically send those results in to the FDA to say, hey, FDA, do you give me approval for my drug to get on market? Sometimes if we're looking at a specialized disease state like cancer, where the FDA is like, okay, your data looks good from a safety and efficacy, but I need you to have more participants. They may say, go ahead, we're going to put you on the market so that the oncology doctors, the oncologists have access, patients have access to the medicine. But we want a phase 4. We want you to continue to study this medicine in a broader population so that we can understand, again, what is the safety, what is that true efficacy, and some of the nuances. So that's what a phase 4 is. It's continued research after the drug has been on market, just to make sure that we truly have properly assessed the risks and benefits of the therapies. And I know we're coming on time, but let's see if there are any other questions that I can answer before we go on. Okay, so there's the US Bureau of Labor just reported that 15 of the top 25 highest paying occupations are health conditions. Yes, that is so true. Because think about it for a second. As people, we are living longer. And as we live longer, we're going to have more ailments. And so you're going to see a lot of folks with multiple, what we call comorbidities or health conditions. So I may have high blood pressure in addition to high cholesterol. And we're starting to see increased rates in cancer cases and some other complicated disease states. So with that, yeah, you need a pool of clinicians who can help to treat these patients. And because there are shortages in nursing, because there are shortages in that expertise space, you will see that, you know, folks are getting paid more because we need to make sure that we have adequate clinicians to take care of patients just from a broader perspective. And that's also true for research, but that's why research is also important too, because as we're making decisions on guidelines and again, medications that we're giving to patients, we need to make sure that we're, you know, connecting the right patient to the right drug and that we're properly diagnosing. Like all that is important. And that's why, again, I say that research is a critical first step to, you know, health equity overall. So I know we only have like 2 minutes left. If you have any last questions, please throw them in the chat. But I just wanted to kind of round out the conversation by going back to the different phases and really showing here how we're looking at healthy volunteers. So again, there's a need for us to use, you know, young, healthy people in these spaces so that we can understand, you know, how are these drugs working? Because we know that there are pharmacokinetics and pharmacogenomic distinctions between different populations. You know, there's differences in kidney function between different groups. There's differences in how drugs are metabolized in different groups. The more that we can understand that here in a healthy space before we get to actually using it in patients with diagnosis of health conditions, that helps. So again, thank you for this time. Again, I want to implore everyone who's a student in this space, we need you, continue down that path. But, you know, I thank you, and please reach out to the Black Health Matters team or myself if there's any additional questions around research and its importance.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank you so much, Ramona, for that inspiring presentation on clinical trials. Thank you so much to the ANMA. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And be sure to follow us on blackhealthmatters.com and also researchincludesme.com. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Please do join us for the next upcoming segments on the general track. We have a session with Curtis Blow, A Change of Heart, My Transplant Journey, that's coming up next. Thank you so much.